elevating the discussion while talking about the things that matter most. You're listening to Society and the State, Life, Liberty, and Your Pursuit of Happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Here in Utah, where our office is, we are in the shadow of one of the NSA's facilities. The issue of surveillance is one that should be important to all of us because we live in an age, the digital era, when it is all too easily to be surveilled upon and trade away our privacy out of convenience. And so I wanted to talk about this issue. It's an important issue to me. I know Brian has talked a lot about it as well in the past. And so I met a guy a few weeks ago who I thought would be a perfect guest to have on. I am pleased to join on to our podcast today, Steve Shillingford, who is the CEO of Anonymity Labs, has an amazing piece of software I've been using in the past few months that we're going to talk about today. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Connor.
I want to start by giving our listeners a little bit of insight about who you are professionally and how it led you into starting this new company and this app that you guys are developing. So can you start perhaps briefly by telling us a little bit about your professional background and how you got into these issues of privacy and surveillance and so forth?
Sure. I've been in enterprise software for, I guess I'm embarrassed to say, over 20 years. And most recently, I was part of a cybersecurity company here in Utah that built, you could think of it as software that acted like a video camera on the network. And that software was used by large Fortune 500 companies and some well-known government agencies to really monitor sort of the external part of their networks, really in a way to defend against, hackers, nation state attacks, etc. And that was about 10 years ago when it was sort of a new idea or new concept. And companies were really trying to figure out how to deal with this kind of incessant data breach that seemed to just be happening all the time. And we all know the high profile ones, but there are a lot that I think people maybe weren't as aware of, but that were equally sort of pernicious. So, had a great run. We grew that company here in the state. I spent a lot of time with government agencies, had to maintain a clearance, had to sort of, help them set up interesting and pretty complicated environments. And had the good fortune of partnering with a company in California called Blue Coat Systems, and that our software at Solera became the basis for their security analytics platform, which is now part of Symantec. In the course of doing that work, the kind of, you could think of the video camera analogy again. That video camera, which was supposed to be kind of facing outward and looking for sort of the bad guys, got turned inward and started really being used in ways that I kind of hadn't anticipated. And it gave me some concern. And it really, as I was exiting the Solera, the company was called Solera Networks, as I was exiting that environment, I found myself thinking a lot about kind of the individuals. Companies and large governments have almost an infinite capacity to apply technology and money and people to this kind of monitoring / surveillance / data mining effort. But it gave me some pause when I thought about kind of the average consumer. And so me and another gentleman sort of talked a lot about this, and we thought that with a lot of our experience in identity management and cybersecurity and some of the other places we'd been, we thought we could maybe take some of that tradecraft, apply it to a consumer-oriented technology and set of applications to give them more control over their personal and private information. And so that's, in essence, how Anonymity Labs was formed. And I think we started that in 2014, and we've had a couple apps in the App Store. One we call SUDO app, which is a private communications tool and another one called SUDO Pay, which is an anonymous payments platform. And we, market those and talk about those as ways consumers can sort of cut back on the amount of personal information they're compelled to share with people or organizations that, they may or may not want to maintain, long-term relationships with, or they may want to not have their credit card information in their cell phone that they've had for 10 years in someone's system that they know is probably going to get breached down the road.
Steve, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I want to understand a little bit. There are a lot of people who recognize, we give up a little privacy, but look at the convenience we get. Obviously, at some point in your life, you have developed an ethical foundation to where you recognized this may not be worth the trade-off in privacy to have the convenience. Where does that ethical foundation begin? What was it that led to your aha moment?
Yeah, I know that's a real popular argument. I think it's kind of a false compromise. I think that if you just take a step back and think about how we interact in the digital world, Brian, if you and I met for the first time for coffee, I sure wouldn't probably get your birth date or your mother's maiden name or maybe even where you live at our first meeting.
Although if you were buying, I might just give it up. I'm just saying.
You might give it up. That's true. And our view is that it's not about making decisions on behalf of people in terms of how they think about privacy. We view, in Anonymy, we view privacy as a continuum, not an absolute. And it's very contextual. Certain circumstances, if I'm selling jazz tickets on KSL, I don't necessarily want to hang my mobile number out there all year long when I'm just selling them for, 4 months out of the year. When I'm buying something from a site that, let's say, isn't Amazon, where I'm a Prime customer, and it's just a one-time transaction, maybe I don't want to leave my physical credit card in that system and database to be hacked down the road and then incur all the inconvenience. So what we talk about and what we try to educate folks on is it's not about sacrificing convenience. This isn't about hiding or making up false identities. This is simply saying Steve Shillingford has multiple modes of communication. I have a cell phone that I have through T-Mobile, but I also have other phone numbers that I use when I sell things on KSL or Craigslist. I have an email address that I use when I'm searching for a house to buy on Zillow, or registering for that newsletter that I may or may not want to continue to receive. And what we tell folks is this is more about controlling, if you will, compartmentalizing, and doing the things in the digital world that you do in the sort of offline world almost automatically. We don't think a lot about how we parse and share information. We make decisions on the fly because we assess, the person across the table or, the company we're doing business with, and we decide whether or not it's safe, whether or not we feel like they'll treat our information responsibly, et cetera. Well, we're trying to bring that mental model to the digital world by giving people more tools than they would otherwise have.
So, Steve, I've been using SUDO, as I said, for the past few months. I believe it's available only for iOS right now, but Android is forthcoming. Do I remember that right?
That's correct.
And so this app has been really interesting because, and please feel free to fill in the gaps, but this is why I wanted to talk to you, because it's so easy, and I have a few other kind of broader philosophical questions that I want to unpack with you too before we conclude, but shifting real quick to this app that you guys have created, SUDO app, which is spelled SUDO. The main feature of this app is to allow you to create these different pseudo avatar identities where, for example, as you said, I'm going to do some online sales on Craigslist. So I'll create this pseudo. It gives me a temporary phone number that I can use. Through that phone number, through the app, I can send and receive phone calls. I can send and receive texts. I can get a unique email address that's kind of this throwaway that's tied to this identity where I can, give that email address out. And then I can, at any moment, delete that pseudo. So I had this phone number and I had this email address. I was selling, we're moving. So I was selling all this stuff online. I listed that phone number and that email address, but now we've moved. So I delete that pseudo. And any phone calls sent there, any texts, any emails, I'm no longer receiving because I've now disassociated myself with that pseudo identity. I can have, if I'm a single guy, I can have a, Tinder pseudo where I don't want to give out to random strangers on the internet my identity that they can then, Google me until I feel that I trust that person enough to say, well, hey, why don't you text me at my main number instead? And then now they know kind of the main phone number to contact me at. If I'm doing, here's the use case I was doing. We're at Libertas Institute sending out a piece of mail to some high-profile business owners about an important policy issue. And I wanted to give them our phone number, but I didn't want them to just, call our main line and, take a message because Connor's not here or whatever. I wanted them to reach me directly. But what I did is I created a pseudo just for this, fundraising outreach. I put that phone number on the piece of mail so that when that phone number is called, for example, my phone says, oh, hey, your business owner pseudo is getting a phone call. And then I know that that is an important person I want to talk to, not just some spam call that I routinely ignore on my phone. And so using these different identities allow me to manage things differently, as you said, kind of set that privacy threshold of who I want to have my information. Are those kind of the generic or the usual use cases, or am I missing something where your customers are more commonly using pseudo or using them in a different way that suits them that I didn't mention?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all great examples. I think the way we talk about it is, and there are probably a handful of categories. Searching is something we do all the time, and I'm not talking just searching on Google, but we search for reservations on OpenTable, houses on Zillow. We do reviews of restaurants on places like Yelp. We're always kind of searching out information, and all of those search sites usually ask for a lot of what I like to say is sticky information. The mobile phone that you're not going to change, the email that you sort of like to keep in your inner circle of family and friends. And so the SUDO app is a great example of a tool that you can spin up and spin down phone numbers and or email addresses that are fully functional. There's no redirect. It's a number that you can make a call with. You can text people back and forth. And you can decide, if you want to keep that identity for that particular, maybe you have a Google identity and that's what you use your pseudo for. Or you could say, I'm just registering for this site temporarily. I want to see what it's about. Maybe I'm dissatisfied with the service. And as I think all of us have experienced, sometimes it's very difficult to disconnect or, disentangle yourself and your personal information from, sites that are providing all these free services. And so one of the things that SUDO allows you to do is literally in one tap, delete that identity and you no longer have to worry about the inbound noise. And so the same examples apply to, things like, we talked about shopping and selling. Shopping is one where the combination of SUDO app and SUDO Pay allows you to not have to leave that physical card detail that you use for bill pay and maybe to fill up your car with, so that okay, I've got to get a new card, I've got to go change all my bill pay information, the hassle that all of us have experienced with identity theft. And fundamentally what all of these things allow you to do is just create some nice compartments, some segments, and some buffers between you and folks that maybe you may or may not want to have all of your personal information. Now, so it's really about control and safety.
Steve, it seems to me that this is born more out of a privacy concern stemming from leaks and hacks of commercial databases where your information is scattered, or individuals who you may not want to have your information. Is there a response that SUDO has, or a use case that SUDO has for those? Many of our listeners, I presume, are more concerned with the government having our information than they are with, some random e-commerce website. And so for those who are concerned about government surveillance, does SUDO have a response to that, or is it more just a resignation that even if you're using this app and a different phone number and email address, that information is still being routed through, AT&T's back door that the NSA has, or what is your response through SUDO to that broader government surveillance question?
Yeah, so there's two components there, and we actually do think a lot about it. And as I mentioned, I've spent a lot of time on that side of the fence. So one is, if you'll notice, when you download our apps, there is zero registration information required of you. No username, no password, no phone number to enter in to create an account. And the reason that is the case is because in the background, what we do is we have a what's technically called a public and private key encryption process, which generates a secure set of encryption keys. One is private. It sits on the user's device. We never have access to it. It never leaves that device. The other is public, and that's what sits up in our cloud. And the combination of those two are what allow our backend to identify that device and send to it the appropriate information, and also route external third-party calls and emails and texts, etc., to the appropriate device. All of that in data in transit that's done on the SUDO platform is encrypted end to end. So, what we have on our back end is a bunch of encrypted, what we like to call encrypted blobs, just basically encrypted files. So when we are breached, which we certainly will be, what people get is, a bunch of gibberish. People also can take comfort in the fact that there's zero attribution. So there's this concept in kind of the technical field called zero knowledge, which is essentially, I don't know. Connor, you tell me that you are a user of SUDO app, but I have no idea who you actually are. I could never actually, pin your calls or emails to a particular device because I have no user called Connor. Mm-hmm. I have a randomly generated identity or ID, that corresponds to your device that you have the SUDO app on. And all of the communications that you do on the SUDO platform are encrypted with that private key that sits on your device. Now, if Connor makes a call to someone with an AT&T phone, well, I can't protect the other side of that transaction, right? So the information of the call could be intercepted and likely is intercepted on the AT&T side of that equation. However, there's no attribution of the phone number on your end. And so consequently, there's really no way to know. You could certainly inspect the contents, but you're not going to be able to inspect or identify who's actually, eliciting that content. So there's a couple different layers of protection there that even in an unencrypted format, there's this notion of, if I can't attribute who's actually passing that information over, you do have some degree of safety and security.
And I should ask, because I've been asked a few times, it's free, which is amazing, to create these pseudos. I think up to 9 is what you guys are currently allowing. So one question that I've been asked that I'll pass to you for a response is, how is Anonymy Labs currently or planning to make money if this is a free service that you're currently providing?
Yeah, so what we, all startups are sort of about trying to get technology in the hands of as many people as possible. And then, at some point when you've got, I think, critical mass, you start offering what people call value-added services. So we have this notion of free and premium service. What we're going to be doing in the fall is coming out with a third product, which is kind of a all-encompassing product that includes some other elements above communications and payments. And that will have some, premium services, things that you can think of like, vanity numbers and additional payment forms and some other capabilities like VPN and other things that just kind of enhance the overall SUDO experience. I can tell you in our terms of service, we're pretty explicit about this. We are not in the business of monetizing the data that and we don't have much to monetize, to be candid, but we're not in the advertising business. We're not in the, monetization of data usage. So we want to bring real value to the table. And we think that some of the features we're going to be coming out with in the next few quarters are going to be, attractive enough that people will pay for them.
Steve, are the products that you're offering attracting any attention from some of the national security agencies? I mean, have you had any pushback about, hey, we need a back door into this?
Yes. I've had many inquiries. I've got relationships. There's some great people back there. And, I continue to have those relationships. I can tell you I've had two types of conversations. One is a pretty short one, which is, this is a pretty interesting tool. We'd like to kind of learn more about it. The other one is we love this tool and we want to use it in a lot of our day-to-day activity. The second conversation is probably more interesting, and certainly we're not. I kind of stand squarely behind Tim Cook on the first conversation, and I sort of feel like there's just absolutely zero possibility for us to build a back door into this type of solution. It's sort of we all know. In fact, I had my own personal information hacked by virtue of the clearance, and me and 22 million other people now know that all of our information is over in China. So I don't have a lot of faith in the backdoor argument, even though it can be heavily politicized.
Steve, it seems to me that the success of Anonymy Labs on the commercial end is in a way married to folks like us in the policy realm, where we're having to, in a sense, combat what I perceive to be a sense of apathy or fatigue, where people are used to being surveilled upon. They're used to sharing everything with anybody online. We seem to have immersed ourselves in this cultural environment in which, we share everything and we don't care who sees it. It seems to me, at least from the policy side, you correct me if your experience is different on kind of the commercial day-to-day side, that there's this fatigue and worrying about it. I mean, literally where I sleep, just 2 miles away, is this NSA facility in Bluffdale, Utah, that stores mass quantities of information, as you said, where initially, in fact, I remember talking to Bill Binney, the former NSA technical director, about the software and the programs that he helped build at the NSA. And like yours, they were intended to be external facing, and then he soon discovered that they were being turned internally. And then so he left and has become a very outspoken activist type person against surveillance in the meantime. But as we kind of share these interviews and talk about these issues, I sense that a lot of people just are okay with the status quo. They're okay with it. Maybe the barrier is a little too high to do anything about it. It seems to me with SUDO, you're trying to now lower that barrier of entry so that the average stay-at-home mom can now take a little bit more privacy control into her hands. Is your success also tied to overcoming that apathy and that fatigue?
Yeah, let me try to unpack that a little bit, because there's a lot there. I'm a big fan of Bill's, and I think he was right to do what he did. And I think that I'm a big fan of behavior. And what in sort of behaviorism or the psychology of individuals is there is a state, and I think Pew did a study here about a year ago, that people are very sensitive and aware of the fact that their personal information is being monetized and collected, and in a lot of cases without their consent. Everybody knows this. Something like 86% were aware of this. The other interesting thing in that study was that 9 out of 10 individuals, and this spans, by the way, generational. It's not just one generation over another. 9 out of 10 individuals are doing things as we speak to try to change that equation.
Wow.
But sort of concurrent to that, they feel like there's a sort of scarcity of choice, and there's a kind of overwhelming complexity in being able to actually do anything about it. And so I think what you call apathy, I think what I would call learned helplessness. And I've been pretty adamant about the fact that policymakers have been really impotent to date because of the politics around privacy and surveillance and sort of state-run data mining campaigns. And so what I think Anonymy brings to the table that's different is the following. I think, one, we're not lobbying for a all or none privacy type solution. I'm not saying go use Tor and go, set up your PGP key and only communicate through, other sort of heavily encrypted apps. What I'm saying is you make a decision on how much or how little you want to share. My apps are going to facilitate that. And rather than, relying on legislators and policymakers to sort of pass legislation that is in the U.S. generally very, very favorable towards companies and generally about 5 or 10 years behind what is current. You just decide, you individual, soccer dad or working mom, you decide when and where and with whom you're going to share your information. And you can have multiple tools, i.e. multiple phone numbers, multiple emails, multiple payment methods that give you the protection and the safety and sort of the security that you're not kind of continuing to expand or add to the digital exhaust. And in that way, we think that, we just kind of swing the balance of power. We kind of shift it back a little bit towards the consumer from where it is today. And hopefully over time, people feel more empowered. Learned helplessness is an amazing thing because you can unlearn it just as quickly as you can learn it. And I think that's our if you will, mission to bring to the marketplace.
That's great. So in conclusion here, Steve, for those who want to unlearn, as you say, that helplessness, where can people go to learn more, to download SUDO?
Well, you can go to Anonymy Labs or anonymy.com, or you can go to sudoapp.com. As we said, we're in the App Store, and we're going to be continuing to add more and more information on our website so people can get educated about how much of that digital information is out there about them, and tools and techniques to take back control.
Fantastic. And we will link to those resources for those who don't want to remember them on our show notes page today, which is societyandthestate.com/23. We'll link to those and much more. This is such an important topic. Steve, I'm so glad to have come across SUDO. As I said, I've been using it. I've been enjoying it and finding all sorts of use cases. So I appreciate what you guys are doing and hope people will go check out the app. Steve, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.